Did you see that? Can you believe that? It could happen to you. Let me show you what can happen to your teeth if you're not careful. Mom, Dad, did you know your child can have permanent teeth that get out of position and not come into the mouth properly? Just recently, I had a family come in, not the first time, and we looked on the x-ray and boom, there it is. There was a mandibular canine. Doesn't just have to be this tooth. We've seen it before. This tooth, which is supposed to come up into the mouth, replace baby teeth, ended up falling asleep right underneath or adjacent to some of the permanent front bottom teeth. Totally a bummer situation, because once it makes it all the way down there, it is really hard to get it back up. So we're gonna talk about that today. First, we're gonna talk about prevention. Unfortunately, there's no absolute way to prevent or guarantee that this won't happen as your teeth come in. That doesn't require, some sort of intervention. But this highlights the importance of visiting the orthodontist early enough to catch permanent teeth as they grow and watch their positions. So timing for seeing orthodontists in between 6 and 8 years old. I like 7 and 8, right? Some of the first permanent teeth are coming in, you get to see where things are at, and then make decisions if some sort of early treatment might be beneficial to development, crowding, things like that, space management. Okay, so let's say you get in to see the orthodontist. That's the first important part of prevention that you should be aware of. Get in to see an orthodontist. You can take these x-rays, they can look and see if the teeth are doing anything crazy, and then have something to measure against. Second, in this case, this bottom canine, right? It should come up like this. It kind of grows underneath it. Sometimes it tips in just a little bit, but that's not crazy. If we're seeing for the first time that it's like, oh, this tooth, this canine here is starting to lean over next to these roots of the incisors on the bottom, then we might start saying, okay, what can we do to help get that to change course and try to go straight up? Well, sometimes space, extra space can help with that. There's different ways to create space. One is by expansion, spreading the baby teeth out, whatever permanent teeth are in place, spreading them out. So maybe the permanent teeth underneath feel like, hey, I can, squeeze up and into the right position. Another option that has been considered or has been used extensively in the orthodontic profession is extraction of baby teeth. Again, it's another way to create space. When you take out the baby tooth, the baby canines, or maybe even the teeth right behind them too, right? You're creating all this extra room for permanent teeth to try and come into their proper position. Now, creating space, again, has been shown to be a reasonable preventive technique to try and help any teeth that are deviant in their positions to try and self-correct. Even that may not guarantee that you get there. So hopefully if let's say you have the tooth that's fallen down and you're like, hey, let's do something to see if we can get it to come back. You do that and it's still going down this way. Let's say it hasn't changed much. You take another x-ray and it hasn't changed. Well, then at that point you may say, hey, we don't just want to give it more time. We want to actively treat this. You were actively treating it if you were doing an expander, but we're going to go get the tooth. What does that mean? Check out our other videos, the expose and bond technique. We send you to a specialist. They go underneath the tissue, find the tooth, the crown of the tooth, put a bracket on it and chain it, and we start to pull it in place. Now, hopefully, if it's only gone down a little bit, then, it's not a huge deal to bring it back up where it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, when you've got a case like this and the tooth is, we're talking about it's a whole nother ball game. It's like David going against Goliath. It's just huge. So hopefully with those different techniques, space creation and or some early intervention, pulling on the tooth to bring it back into place could put you in a better position to maintain all of your teeth and make it so that the process of getting it into place is not as intense. No, but okay, we've made it through that part. Let's say you're past that. Let's say we didn't catch it, or let's say you decided to be really passive and conservative about the whole thing. You're like, I just want to see what happens. Okay, so you give it time and then boom, you got a sleeper all the way down there. What are your options at that point? Well, if it's all the way down there, you can take a special x-ray that shows you the relationship of that tooth with the adjacent teeth. Anytime you try to move an impacted tooth around underneath all the other roots, you could damage those other roots and those other teeth. So we want to check and see the proximity of all of those things going on in your bone. And next, we want to see the position of the tooth. If the tooth is on the front part of the bone, the middle part of the bone, or in the very back of the bone, that can affect how you pull it into place if you're going to try and do that. Okay, so you're evaluating health and risk of moving that tooth around other teeth, and you're checking out the position of the tooth. That x-ray can be very valuable. You figure out where it's at. Okay, so then what are our options if we decide that we want to try and pull it in, all right? We're talking about if it's in the front, you're pulling it out and then up and back in. And that is extensive time. So you gotta do the same expose and bond, but you're gonna pull the tooth out into tissue, the gum tissue, down in there. To pull it out, pull a tooth out up into the mouth, through that tissue is not the most ideal. You may have to consider gum and bone grafts because as you pull that tooth into place, the tissue may not respond because it's not not supposed to be pulled through like that. You may need to visit another specialist to try and help that. Now, you can do the work, right? It can be done, but the predictability of the gum outcome, the bone outcome may be questionable. So that part is really tricky. And not to mention, not just tricky, you may need all these extra things, but just to get it into place, that's a lot of pulling, a lot of different directions. And so if you've got a lot of other work to do too, it just may not be the best. Although I love the idea of keeping all of your teeth and not having to take them out, you just have to know that there are some reasonable or some decent risks associated with that type of process. So let's say you decide not to do that. But before we get to that, one more thing. Again, if you decide to do that, it's not that it's impossible. It's just that there are associated risks you have to be aware of as you visit with your provider. Could be me, and we could try to help you work through those risks and try to minimize those risks if we decide to try and pull it all the way in. Okay, well, let's say we haven't even started talking about, in this case, right? This individual, this patient, had several impacted canines, meaning that hadn't come down into place at the right time. Again, in my mind, the best way to try to avoid these procedures, extra procedures, the expose and bond, is by space management a little bit earlier on, and then you give it time to see if it can adjust into place. Well, what other options do we have if we're not pulling the tooth into place? You could just say, hey, we are going to exnate that tooth. We're going to take it out. If you do that, if you do one tooth, you take it out, now you basically put yourself in a situation where your bite, right, teeth fitting together, can't fit ideally because you're missing a tooth on the bottom that should be there and everywhere else is normal. So you may end up with a little bit of extra overbite, what we call overjet. Again, it's not a killer. It's not a killer, any of this stuff, not killers, but you just can't finish as ideal as possible. So how do you fix that? One, you take out the tooth and you open that space where the tooth should have been and you plan for an implant down the road, all right? For you youngins, right, if you're 12 years old, you might have to wait 6 years before you can actually put an implant in there. And then you're just dealing with an implant. Implants can be great, but you're dealing with something that's not natural, okay? The other option is you're gonna take out that tooth. Well, in that case, I'm gonna plan to take out teeth everywhere else to make it symmetrical, and then I can get my bite and teeth lined up to fit perfectly. So those are two options if you decide to take a tooth that's all the way sleeping out of the mouth and still try to get a good result with the teeth fit together and all lined up. But in my opinion, if we can try to prevent, and that may have happened in this case, but maybe not, come see the orthodontist early enough so that you can monitor the progressions of all those teeth to make sure that they get into the mouth, or at least put yourself in the best situation to try and get it in the mouth. And then if it's still not listening, if those teeth still aren't listening to the orthodontist and what you're trying to do, then maybe you can tackle the pull-in process earlier before it gets too bad. I hope it helps inspire you. Share this with your friends so that they can get their kids in early to make sure that they don't have any runaway canine sleepers that need to be managed. And of course, consider subscribing to the channel so that I can open your eyes to the wonderful world of straight teeth and beautiful bites. That's all I've got. Just a little PFOing so you know where you're going. Packard out.